I have got a pretty cool project here, and to be honest, I stole some of this idea actually from my son's woodworking class. Here's what we've got going. It's what I'm calling a barrel-sided box, and I'm calling it that because if you look at it this way, we've got a curve in the sides, and then if we look at it this way, curve in the ends, and then even if you look at the lid is domed in this direction, and then if we come this way, the lid is domed in this direction. When you look at it in this three-dimensional state, like it's sitting here, it looks like this could be pretty complex. How do I do joinery in these round sides and make all this happen? And the answer to that is that we're gonna put the box together as a rectangle. After the whole thing is glued together, we're gonna create the barreled sides. So the stealing part of this was for my son's tech ed class. He had to make a box. He did a lot of the work here in my shop. Then once I was looking at the box, I was thinking, well, that's pretty cool, but it'd be neat to make it just a little more interesting, a little bit more complex. And that's what led to the bandsaw work that creates the barrel side. The other thing that I think is a really nice touch is the stripe. In this case, we've got cherry with a maple accent. And I'm going to show you how to do that. That's the first step. And once we've got it in the box, I think it really adds a nice detail, and it looks much more complex than it really is. I've had a lot of people see this kind of thing in my work and say, well, how do you do that inlay? And especially in this case, a rounded side with a curved inlay. Well, it's not an inlay, it's a stripe we're gonna put in first. So let's take care of that. You're gonna see a variety of woods get used here because I've got different components made up ahead of time. So we're gonna start with cherry maple, just like we did on the finished box. And here's the deal with that stripe. Like I said, it's really pretty simple, but noisy. I've got a couple pieces here ready to go. This was a piece of cherry, large enough for my project. And I'm gonna give you those dimensions, the project dimensions, in just a sec. What I did is I went to the bandsaw and I cut this gentle sweeping curve. Couple things are key to that cutting. One, we want a blade in the bandsaw that is 1/4 inch, 3/8 would probably be okay, 4 teeth per inch. The thing with the curve is don't allow it to curve real sharp because we've got to be able to bend our accent piece to whatever curve you make. So if you overdo the curve, if you make it too dramatic, you're going to have a hard time getting your stripe to go into it. The other thing that's really important is that notice we have a concave area, a concave area. What's important about that is that when we squeeze the pieces together with clamp pressure, they'll kind of grab each other, they tooth into each other. If we don't have curves, if we just kind of do an angle from one end to the other, when you go to clamp this, they're going to tend to slide past each other. So because we've got a convex here going into a concave here, they're going to stay closed. They're not going to creep past each other when we do that step. Now, there's some bandsaw marks on here. That's just fine. You're not going to see those in the finished project. Do not go back and drum sand the bandsaw marks off, because if you do, you're going to change the shape and they're not going to mate back together. For this step of the operation, we're just going to use conventional yellow glue, and we need to get it on both edges because of the stripe that we're putting in between. All right, now a lot of times when I close this, I have to close it in 2 stages because it takes quite a bit of clamp travel to get it completely closed. Let's see how this one goes. can do a little bit with hand pressure there. That's going really well. The maple I'm putting in is about a 1/16 of an inch thick. A surface sander, a drum sander, is a really easy way to produce those thin pieces. It's going to depend for you what tooling you have as far as how you're going to make them in your shop. Notice that the maple is just a little bit thicker than the cherry, or the maple is wider than the cherry is thick. And that's just fine. We'll take that off with a sander or a planer after the glue is dry. All right, we've got the joint closed. Squeeze out on both sides. I'm feeling underneath to make sure that my inlay strip is all the way down to the bottom of the cherry. That feels great. Another piece here set to go. Now I've got pieces I already did this to so that we don't have to wait for glue to dry. We can keep moving on the project with the pieces that are already ready. So let's have a look at those next and talk about project dimensions. Before we do any more assembly, let's talk about the dimensions that are relative to this project. For thickness of material, you can do this with 3/4 inch stock. The thicker you can work with, the thicker material you can work with, the more dramatic a barrel you can get in the side. So I started with 4/4, full 1 inch rough sawn, and I took off just enough to get the two faces clean. That's going to let me get the most dramatic barrel. But like I said, if all you have is 3/4 inch stock, it'll work. Box dimensions are 5 by 5 by 8. So when this whole thing is putted together like this, we are 5 by 5 on the end, and then in this direction, 5 by 8. The joinery is very simple. I just did rabbet joints on the corners so that we can close against the ends. The rabbet joints are cut 1/4 inch deep. We really need rabbets there as opposed to a butt joint to give us a good solid joint, but we don't need to go any deeper than 1/4 inch for this small project. Notice that there's no accommodation at this point for a bottom. We're going to take care of that later. Now, when I watched my son put his box together, which was made just like this, I noticed I was really trying to help him not get squeeze out in the inside corners because that's such a pain to deal with. And part of the answer to that can come from glue selection. This is an exceptionally thick glue, hence the name. So what I found as he was doing his was that still got to be careful with the glue, but because it's so thick, it's less likely to ooze into the inside corners of the box as we put everything together. And that's good, because then we don't have to worry about trying to get in there to clean up. All right, now in go the ends. Now notice I'm kind of putting it into the inside corner and then closing it. That helps push the glue to the outside. Into the inside corner and close it. And then up here, I'm going to make that happen by cocking it out and closing, cocking it out and closing. Kind of rocking everything into place helps push any squeeze out toward the outside. I'm going to stand that up. Now we need to do two things. We want to close against the shoulders of the rabbets. So I'm going to clamp this way gently. And then I'm going to also clamp in this direction after I make sure that my tops are nice and flush. I'm going to work all my clamps at the same time. Okay, now, once I know that everything is closed, I can rob this clamp off and come this way. And I'll do the same thing with that other clamp. So, get the box assembled. This wraps us up for now for part 1. Then we're going to come back in our next step. So be sure you make sure and you catch part 2. In our next step, we're going to get the bottom put on. I'm going to talk to you about the layout that we need for the bandsaw to create the barrel shape, and we'll have a look at the bandsaw work.